We collaborated really well together. It's just that we were always fighting about something else.
Hello, and welcome to episode 7 of the Who Cares Anyway podcast. My guest on this episode is Paul Draper, or to be a little more precise, Paul Wendell Draper of the Sleepers. Now, some of you might be asking, what is with all this stuff about the Sleepers? And I should clarify that I certainly did not fall out of the womb listening to the Sleepers. I did not come across their music until about 2005, and that was through the CD compilation The Less an Object, which collects the Sleepers' first EP, which Paul Draper was a part of, then a 7-inch Mirror/Theory that he did not play on, and then the LP Painless Nights that also post-dated Mr. Draper's time in the band. But that CD captured almost everything the Sleepers recorded, at least in the studio, not counting some live stuff that has surfaced elsewhere. But in any event, Paul Draper was a founding member of the Sleepers, and as we'll hear in this interview, had been playing music with Ricky Williams elsewhere in Palo Alto and surrounding areas dating back to about 1975. We also hear about the pre-punk glam scene in Palo Alto, such as it was, and its sort of counterpart up in San Francisco, and just a lot of interesting prehistory that is sort of alluded to but not elaborated on in the actual book, Who Cares Anyway? A couple of other things, because of the nature of these interviews and the fact that I edit them down, there are a couple of references that are sort of lost. After the first little interlude, I refer to a he. It might seem like I'm referring to Michael Kowalski, but no, I'm referring to Ricky Williams in the context of the band Crime, which Ricky was the original drummer for. And then after a later break, I refer to, or later on in the interview, I refer to another he, mentioning a house at 8th and Howard, or apartment at 8th and Howard in San Francisco. And that is Michael Belfer, who talks about this kind of legendary or infamous dwelling at 1183 Howard. But without further ado, we'll go ahead and get into the interview. And that's actually going to start out with Paul Draper sort of starting from the beginning.
Well, Ricky and I technically lived in Mountain View, and Michael lived in Palo Alto, and Tim lived in Menlo Park, I believe at the time. So there was pretty much nothing in Mountain View as far as clubs. Palo Alto had, let's see, we were coming off the glam era and David Bowie and that kind of stuff. So they had like this little club called the My Oh My that a lot of the, I guess you would call them hipster kids, like went to, but it was more like glam and dress up and kind of before punk. But we never played there, but they might have had some acts playing there. And there was another place in Palo Alto, but I can't recall right now offhand. It's basically a wasteland. Bar bands. That's about the best you're going to get. Once the movement started, or what if you want to call it a movement, the New Varsity Theater, which was a really old movie theater, which with a stage, and so they had actually a Sleepers played there a couple times to big crowds, but that would be well after 77, 78, maybe 78, 79. And then the other thing that they opened the Keystone Palo Alto, part of the Keystone trio of clubs. San Francisco was the Stone, which was really, really near the Mabuhay, and Berkeley had the Keystone Berkeley.
Mm-hmm.
The Stone was mostly hard rock, so we never actually played the Stone, but we played the other two. And there was a big, kind of similar to what happened in LA at the Whiskey. There was a punk rock night, like it was like the novel thing. So they brought up all the bands from San Francisco, the top ones, which was us, the Nuns. Who else was it? Maybe it was Negative Trend. I can't remember the whole bill, but there's like 3 or 4 bands at that gig, so the Keystone Palo Alto was like a giant Quonset hut with the arched, like the Cow Palace, kind of like a curved arch ceiling made out of tin, basically. But what happened, if you turned up really too loud in that place, it was just like cacophony. You couldn't like hear or make anything out. It was just reverberation all over the place, just like painful. And we knew that, and we like to play loud, but we turned down for our set. We turned way down, and actually our set ended up sounding pretty good because of that.
Yeah, and you played in a band called Trigger, which I think I mentioned in a footnote. But you mentioned Dirk Etienne, and I saw that he later at least put out a single on maybe Casablanca. But what was
That's
Trigger
correct.
like?
Trigger was probably one of the only glam rock bands from Palo Alto. But he was he's an interesting guy because he's from a pretty wealthy family in Salinas, Salinas Valley.
Mm-hmm.
So he was the lead singer, and he basically drafted me into Trigger, like because he saw me playing acoustic guitar on the lawn in college, like at Foothill College. And then he asked me if I ever played bass, and I said no. And he said, "Oh, I have a bass. I'll give you this bass. You can play in my band, basically." And so he gave me a Hagstrom, like I think it was Hagstrom bass, like which was a semi hollow body. And then he also like bought all the amps and everything in the band. And I mean, his dad was like an attorney, big attorney in Salinas, and his mom owned the huge lumber company, the Tynan Lumber Company in the Salinas Valley. So that was, that. But he was pretty cool. He was very into like pop, glam, like Bay City Rollers, all the way to Iggy to Bowie to Elton John. And so he brought a guitar player from Salinas, and the drummer and I were from Palo Alto area. The drummer was, let's see, if you want names, the drummer was Russ Gottfried, I think, and the guitarist was Mike Martin.
Did you all come close to doing any recording, or were you doing originals, or I guess you were doing
Yeah,
originals?
we did a lot of originals, 1 or 2 covers.
Okay.
We didn't go into the studio, but we were doing like homemade tapes. But it didn't last long enough because he was like, let's see what happened. He was basically transplanted from Salinas, right? Just going to school.
Oh, okay.
Or Dirk Etienne. And then he decided to change the name of the band from Trigger to Mercury Dirk. With his, so it became like Mercury Dirk after that. And then, but it was still, we had a lot of fun, a lot of like spandex, not spandex so much, but lame, silver lame. I think I had like a silver, what's that material?
Oh yeah.
The jacket. I had a silver jacket, which was really cool. And we all had really high platform shoes.
Did you all ever play up in San Francisco, or was it all down in the Palo Alto area?
We played Palo Alto, Santa Cruz, not San Francisco. I mean, I don't think anyone would let us play,
Right.
Like, that style wasn't done, and maybe we would have figured out where we could have played eventually, but we sort of fractured off because we were all we kind of traveled the same circles. So Ricky was around, Ricky Williams,
Right.
from the Sleepers, and his sister Kathy Williams, his little sister. Let's see, and
Was Michael Kowalski around at that point?
yeah, he was bouncing around. Yeah, and Clem Smith, who played lead guitar. You ever heard of him?
You know, I've heard Michael mentioned him, but I didn't know. I think he just referred to him as this guy. I can't remember if he knew his last name. He referred to a Clem. He referred to a Nola.
Yeah, Clem was he at one time he was a boyfriend of Linda
Oh, okay.
Linda Cowan, who the Linda song was written about, and he was the son of a very prestigious music professor at Stanford, music and also computer science, computer music, computer science. So
And Michael Kowalski's dad was a professor there as well.
he was a physics, and he was either he might have been San Jose State. I'm not positive
Oh, okay.
if he was Stanford, but he was a professor. And both Clem and Kowalski went to Gunn High School, whereas Ricky, for instance, went. Well, he was supposed to go to Palo Alto High School, but he was always in the alternative school along with Michael Belfer. You know,
Oh,
where-
I did.
which
Okay.
and Tim Mooney, where they put people that were all, you know,
Oh, okay.
in
I didn't.
trouble.
I didn't realize. I didn't. He didn't quite fill me in on that. But because I was going to ask where when Ricky came into the picture, because you all you all were playing music together, and here's where I've heard two different stories. One of them remembered Ricky being well, Michael remembered Ricky being just a drummer at that point, playing drums, and you playing, I don't know, I guess guitar.
Guitar, yeah,
But
guitar
according to you, Ricky was already singing at that point as well.
sometimes, but not in
Sometimes.
a band. But
Okay.
I think when I first met Ricky, he showed up with his, if I recall, he showed up with his little sister at a party that Trigger was having. And we Dirk Etten and I lived together in a house in Palo Alto near Whiskey Gulch, which doesn't exist anymore because it's all developed now. But that's like next to the 101 freeway in Palo Alto, which was the only place you could buy alcohol because of everything was dry because of the college for a long time. I mean, that changed over time, but anyway, so here, like Ricky and Kathy, his sister, come in, and I don't know who else came in, and I believe they were like pretty high, or Ricky was pretty high, and that was like the first time I met him. Like, we're going like, who is this guy? He was just like kind of like arrived in dramatic fashion. I don't know how he found out about the party, but someone probably invited him.
See, I don't know Palo Alto very well. I've heard Whiskey Gulch, but Palo Alto being the center of Silicon Valley, but at the time it wasn't really known that way yet. Is that right?
Only to people in the semiconductor industry.
Okay.
There was no software industry. It hadn't like got to that point yet. But the people that were making semiconductors were from there, and Mountain View, and Palo Alto, and Menlo Park, River City. Hewlett Packard. They were making devices. Fairchild Semiconductor. It was a college town, so you gotta like, Palo Alto is like between the 101 freeway, which goes from San Francisco down to San Jose and keeps going past San Jose. But so Palo Alto is nestled between that and Stanford, right, which is west in the hills, basically, or near the hills, almost to the hills. So Whiskey Gulch is like right smack up against the freeway, pretty much, that neighborhood, which is actually where Ricky lived for a while. He lived there and a couple other spots in Mountain View. So technically he did live that was Palo Alto for a while.
And was he doing any other bands before you started playing, or how did you
No, he
start
was
playing with
kind of
him?
like he sort of looked like he was emulating Iggy Pop, which with his look at that time. And I think he was just singing like to himself and not really in bands. Like I said, there weren't very many bands, right?
Right.
This is like very in the early days. There were bands, but they were all like corporate hard rock bands or people struggling to be a hard rock band and playing bars.
Right. I heard similar stories from people who were in San Francisco in like 1975, 76, in terms of the limited options. And one reason why I asked if you played originals was that a few people mentioned that it was hard to get away with playing originals. You'd have to sort of sneak them in your set at a lot of the places in San Francisco in, say, 1975. Um,
Well, they had. Have you heard of the Palms?
y- yes, that was. I've looked at their calendars. They had some pretty interesting kind of combinations, but Layla and the Snakes would be sort of the
Right.
one that
So
would
they
kind of
had a
cross
lot of
over.
gay. It
Yeah.
was in the gay. What became the gay district? Became later. I mean, it was sort of all this stuff. So is like in the early stages, right? So you'd see a couple of bands play there, Leela and the Snakes, and maybe some others.
It was kind of that period right before, maybe 76.
Yeah.
Which is basically when around the time that you went up and saw Crime that with Ricky in it. So I guess maybe I'm jumping ahead, but
Yeah, that was yeah, that's a little bit ahead. But Rick, so when Dirk Etienne decided to split the Bay Area and go back to Salinas, and I don't remember why that happened. It's not like we were having a fight or anything. I think he just did what he was going to do at Foothill, and then he went back there, and we were kind of still in touch. But then here I had, learned how to play bass guitar after only playing guitar. So then so I played both, and then Ricky and I just kind of like hung out, and then we just tried to jam and stuff. And he would play drums or sing, and I would play guitar sometimes and bass, electric guitar or bass guitar. I had a Telecaster at that time, and he had his drum kit. We got a couple microphones, and then started writing songs. That's still on my list, is to like dredge up those songs that no one's heard. Like
oh, wow, yeah. And was that even that was before he
pre-crime.
pre-crime? Yeah, yeah. What do you remember about that? Because I came across one version of how he got involved in it, but do you remember anything about, um, for people listening, Palo Alto or where you all were up to San Francisco is what, like 45-minute drive, and Ricky didn't drive?
Yeah, you'd have to drive Ricky up there, or someone. You'd have to get a ride. Well, Ricky liked to hang out in San Francisco. Sometimes he would just stay up there for days, crashing at people's houses, and then come back and to his parents or his grandparents and decompress. But I think I had a job, or I believe I had a job in advertising newspaper doing graphics. And so, what was you had another question
Oh
about?
yeah, or if you remember how, because to me that was the initial connection between Palo Alto and okay, between your part of Palo Alto music scene where the Sleepers came from and San Francisco punk scene was, Ricky uh, joining Crime, and time wise, I believe that would have been probably late summer, early fall of 76, because that show that you remembered going to was Halloween 1976 up at the Old Waldorf, the benefit show that I've read about and heard about
With the
that
Fruit
show.
of the Loom, with the
Yeah,
Fruit of the
exactly.
Loom. Did I
Yeah.
have that? Did I have that right? That was just my
You remember
recollection.
that? But yeah, but I saw another. There was a very thorough oral history done in a zine, Ugly Things. I think it was done in the '90s. So
Okay.
they had interviews with lots of quotes with Johnny and Hank Rank, and maybe I don't know if Frankie was around at that point, but they told the story about that, and it meshed with what you remembered. You know,
Oh, good.
a handful of people And so that's almost like prehistoric in the sense that there was really no audience for that. You know,
Right, right.
the Ramones had played maybe a month before up at the Savoy, so this is all before the Mabuhay really had started booking any of these bands, and so yeah, that was like really early, kind of ground zero. And I just was wondering if you remembered uh,
A lot,
that
a
initial
lot
part
had
of
to
it.
do with Michael Kowalski, like being a catalyst because he was so into the culture, and so he would. I think he was friends with people in the Tubes, like the band the Tubes, Prairie
Right.
Print, Bill
Okay.
Spooner. So he was around during the glam and the progressive rock, Roxy music, that kind of stuff. So he was around during that time too. So he like bounced back between Palo Alto and San Francisco as well. So he was. I mean, the best word is a catalyst and like a agitator. What is it? Progenitator or whatever that is. Um,
No, I know what you mean. There's a word that's on the tip of my tongue as well.
so he had introduced people, and I think he was a big reason Ricky ended up playing drums in Crime.
Yeah, that was exactly what I read in that oral history, the ugly things thing on crime. They mentioned exactly that Michael Kowalski had somehow fallen asleep and somehow made it into their rehearsal studio and passed out, and they just started playing, and he just sat there and listened. We haven't to the listeners introduced Michael Kowalski, but he definitely appears. Well, his photo will appear in the book, and he um, is talked about in the book. And yeah, he wasn't around that long relative to this.
But yeah, he was a very brilliant guy, and just tragically another casualty. Too early. Um, but one thing about Michael, he would finagle all the new records before anyone else could get them. Like the Sex Pistols and the Ramones, and so he would like show up with the what was the first Sex Pistols single,
God Save the Queen, I think.
or was it
Was it
Anarchy
Anarchy?
or was it
Yeah,
Anarchy?
I
And
should
he would
know.
show up with that, like, and no one had it yet, like things like that.
Yeah, so you can't. It's hard to put a finger. I mean, he was in UXA, but he didn't play an instrument, which is, or he didn't
Well,
play
he
an instrument
wrote
in the
he
band.
wrote
He
poetry,
wrote
so
he wrote poet,
and
right?
lyrics.
He was kind of, almost like a Malcolm McLaren figure, maybe,
Right,
like
right.
a manager, or again something you don't really have today, but something that
Well, he was also very caustic, and he could be really like a very caustic wit and put people down, and a lot of that put off a lot of people because he was just so bright. But he did destroy my copy of Anarchy in the UK when he got in a fight, and it was like under his coat, and he went sailing across the asphalt during this fight, not with me, and that was like my first issue, first mint issue of Anarchy in the UK. But then he found it later, and he gave me another copy. So
did the Sleepers started rehearsing while he was still in Crime, for sure.
well, you have it depends on whether see, from my vantage, it's the Sleepers really started when Ricky and I were writing songs together before he was in Crime, and during and while he was still in Crime, because that's where we were also playing with Mike White,
Ah, right.
uh,
Okay.
the second guitarist who officially came later, much later. But this is before Mike Belfer and Tim Mooney. So that's the way I would say. But we didn't call ourselves the Sleepers. We were just doing stuff, writing and rehearsing. and we had a rehearsal space up in the hills from the guy who owned, no relation, but he owned Draper's Music Center, which was a music store. It was a beautiful home, and they were just gone for the summer, or his wife. Maybe his wife stayed up there. Maybe they were separated. I can't quite remember the whole story. So we would just drive up into Portola Valley Hills, and then rehearse up there. We'd just bring beer and stuff with us, just me and Ricky. And so that was pretty fun, and we didn't have to pay them. They let us do it for free. I don't know how I finagled that one, but maybe the guy just liked me because I had the same name.
Is that where you all started with when Michael and Tim joined? Because I remember there
Oh
was another.
no, that was still even later, because
Okay.
once the summer was over, I guess that was either the summer of 75 or 76, I'm thinking, when we were up in the hills. No, because we had to stop because they came back, and we had to leave. So where Michael, well, Michael's story says he ran into Ricky and he thought he looked like the perfect singer, but Michael didn't know me. He didn't know that Ricky and I knew each other. He just saw Ricky and liked him. So, and then Ricky told him that he was rehearsing with me, and then so we all four of us got together, and Mike was rehearsing with Tim Mooney.
Right.
But where we had to go find a place to play. Initially, we were playing in my apartment, which was not working too well, in Redwood City, because it was so loud. We could only do that a couple of times, and then wasn't tolerated anymore. So we rented a place on Birch Street in Old Town, Midtown Palo Alto, which is where all the skateboarders are from Palo Alto. I mean, that's a side story. So that's the south part of Palo Alto. So it was like above a restaurant or above a store, just like a office space, and we empty. So we just rented it, and got really hot up there. Not very good ventilation, but that's where we were doing it for a while. And then we got that big place in San Jose.
Yeah, I'm trying
Which
to
was,
remember
like
the name. What was the name? There was some connection to somebody in Journey, like maybe the brother of somebody in
Yeah,
Journey.
right.
And I'm trying to
That's-
remember the name of the band, and it's escaping me. They played at the Miners' Benefit. I'm looking
Oh,
for
you mean Caesar?
Seizure. Yeah, that's it. Was there some connection to them at the at the studio that you all were renting, or
Yeah,
am I completely?
they rented the space next to ours,
Oh, okay.
so we became kind of like pals with them. I mean, this was like not like San Francisco rehearsal studios. This is like sprawling South Bay, huge spaces, you know, in these warehouses, and you just got like this very large space, and then with a gallery, like your friends could go up in the gallery and watch you, like a balcony.
Okay, and compared to Iguana, where my understanding is that bands didn't
Yeah,
even necessarily bring their own equipment. I mean, they would play on shared equipment, or is that
Iguana, I don't know. Like sometimes some people brought their own.
okay?
Um,
But it wasn't like there were a lot of separate rooms there. It was like one common space, or
right.
I've never been in. That was my understanding. Did you ever go? Did you ever rehearse in Iguana?
Yeah, I think we did at a
Okay.
couple points there, and something Blue Studio. You've heard of that one?
Hmm.
Some of these names escape me
Right. I
because
mean,
they don't exist anymore.
right. Yeah. Iguana was like 76 to 83, and all kinds of pretty much everybody seemed to have rehearsed there at some point, whether it was Flipper or Dead Kennedys,
Yeah,
Negative
they were
Trend.
around for a while. I know there was like a gay bar called the Stud around the corner,
Right. Right.
and
Yes.
and
Yeah.
Ricky used to like to go there and like get beer. Like,
Right. I think
It
because
was pretty funny.
the stud was still there, and there was the place called the Eagle. I'm not sure if the Eagle was there in the '70s, but they started doing live music on like Thursday night, so we would go down there. Um, where it was still very clearly in that particular part of town that had its reputation. It was the sort of number one leather district. I mean, I guess to say
Yeah.
there's a gay neighborhood, there was like multiple, and they were all maybe a little bit different in their.
Well, the gay evolution sort of coincided and came up at the same time as the punk thing came up and the post-punk, and they sort of like crossed over each other at certain times, but kind of still independent of each other.
There were a lot of bands at the time that had art school connections, especially the Art Institute, San Francisco Art Institute. But the Sleepers, like Negative Trend, were a band that did not. Maybe you studied design. I'm not sure, but you were the only one who went to or pursued higher education in the Sleepers. But there were no what I would understand to be art school people in the Sleepers.
Well, I think Michael went back to
That's true.
music
That's true. Later on,
music
right,
studies,
right. But at the
but
time, he was right out of high
yeah,
school,
I
right?
was more like not art school at that. I mean, I went to art school later, but at that time, I was not in art school per se. I was doing pragmatic commercial art just because I had the ability, and had done some of it in college. But yeah, that's the difference of the Sleepers. No art school, what do you call it? Presumptions, or I'm not saying that anything
Right.
wrong with those people, but we're basically more working class, a lot like this Iggy and the Stooges. We're working class, and the Ramones, right?
Right. Right.
So in fact, Ricky hung out with Iggy for quite a while
Yeah. How,
when
how did
Iggy
that
was
work?
when
How,
Iggy was on his extended Lost Weekend phase
how long was he there? And because I've heard
in
that he,
in San Francisco.
yeah, that he was dating Dee Dee, or dating, if that's the right word. Um, Spending time with Dee Dee.
Oh,
Dee-
Detroit. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't even know. It seems like a lot longer than it probably actually was. But Dee Dee was, as you know, from Detroit too.
Right.
Like,
Right. Okay. Duh. Detroit. That's
you might
right.
have known him in Detroit. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Because I've heard, certainly from Michael, and just kind of being vaguely aware that the Idiot tour came through. I believe it was maybe March of '77, and David Bowie was touring with him, and that's where Michael told me this story about being up at some bar in San Francisco, and I can't remember which one or if he remembered. But do you remember that show, or did you all go up to that show together to see
Yeah,
the?
we all met Iggy and David Bowie, and there was a lot of tension between Ricky and Iggy because of Dee Dee, which was kind of funny. Not funny, but just jealousy, rivalry or whatever.
Did he just kind of stay there after the show, or not stay there, but stay in the area after the show, or was this Lost Weekend at a different point in time?
I think it was before that, maybe even before I really got to know Ricky very well, or almost the same time. But no, that didn't happen after when the Sleepers were together.
Oh, okay.
So, and then Ricky started going with Dee Dee, and I think, I just remember this big room and we were there, Dee Dee was there, Iggy was there, and like Ricky was glaring at Iggy. That's as I recall. And then we went out into the bar, and then I met Bowie and Iggy, and realized like these guys are tiny, very small people, physically.
But do you remember what bar that was? Would that have been Polk Street, or?
I don't know if it was a bar or if they just had an open bar wherever we were.
Oh, okay.
Did you say it was the Waldorf? I can't even remember.
I don't even remember. I'd have to look up where that sounds about right. But yeah, I'd have to look that
And
one
you
up.
said it was in what
I
month is 77?
I believe it was around March, but I could be wrong. It was definitely around the same time.
The Sleepers hadn't been together very long. That's all I know.
Okay. Yeah,
So
okay.
it might have been after March 77, maybe later in 77.
Okay. Yeah, because that was like the very beginning of the Mabuhay. How do you remember your first time going to the Mabuhay? Or I don't even know if you pronounce it Mabuhay or Mabuhay. Different people pronounce it different ways.
I think I called it the Mabuhay. So
Mabuhay. Okay,
I don't know if that's correct or not, but
that's the majority.
I was seeing. Well, the first kind of exposure I had was before the Mabuhay. I took a road trip to New York. I'm backing up here with this guy named Dan Lazar. I don't know if you've heard that,
I've heard that
but
name. Yeah.
he hung around with Kowalski and other people. But this was in 74 or 75. We drove my Mustang. I had a 66 Mustang all the way to New York because he had a girlfriend that went to Vassar College upstate. But anyway, we ended up going to CBGB's. I had never heard of it, you know. He brought me there, and then so you know what CBGB's is tiny, right? So there's like there's Patti Smith is there. I mean, probably everybody's there, you know, that because they all hung out there, right? Ramones. But anyway, it was a show with Jonathan Richman opened, and television was the headliner. The early television, you know, Richard Hell, Tom Verlaine.
Okay.
And I said, and I was just like, boy, I never heard anything like this before, you know. So I was kind of amazed. I really dug it. So that was my indoctrination, I think, in the live music. But anyway, going back to your, that's another story, that road trip, but like,
Okay.
that was crazy.
So when you saw the Mabuhay, you must have thought, "Oh, it's kind of like CBGB's," or
Yeah, I don't know if I was consciously thinking that, but yeah, the CBGB sort of like was my shock to my system that got the whole, you know, the whole thing going. Plus the records that I was listening to. But so anyway, yeah, I saw everyone was coming through town through the Mabuhay. Blondie, the Damned, Ramones, I think. Did they play? I'm trying to remember. They either played there or the Keystone. I think I saw them at the Keystone.
They also had a show at Winterland with the Nuns. Well, they would have been, the Ramones would have been the headliner that summer of '77, and that got talked about a lot.
Oh yeah, I saw the Nuns. I saw the Nuns early on, and some really fun bands like the Dicks, the Weirdos, the Nerves, Nuclear Valdez, which I thought was a great band. And I think I even put like Caesar in. I almost think of them in that category. But then they got a little bit more punk as they went on. But so the guy you're thinking of was Valerie, I think, at Caesar. He's related to the Valerie in Journey. Is that right?
Be it. That must be
Or
it. I knew there was
his
some
brother.
Yeah, I knew there was some association there.
Maybe his brother.
Okay.
But they really liked us. I remember that, and then we ended up like playing gigs with them all the time.
Okay, the one that I would always see you all on the flyers with would be the Mutants.
Mutants, and we played with Negative Trend a lot, and occasionally we played with Avengers and Crime.
Do you remember much about the place at 8th and Howard that he talks about? I gather that you weren't going over there as much, but where Craig Gray and Brian Campbell lived.
Yeah, I was there.
You were there? Okay.
I mean, I don't.
You didn't participate in some of the extracurricular.
I don't know. I think might have been some drug stuff going on.
Yeah,
that I wasn't involved in, so I wasn't there that much. But that's where all our equipment was stolen.
Ah.
Do you remember that story?
A little bit. It kind of got there was a stolen guitar, and that was something that I was assuming a lot from readers. Maybe I'll have to deliver some extra
Oh, that was
context here, but yeah, yeah,
Michael's thing with the other guys. But
yeah.
we
Okay.
had all our amps, everything was in Brian truck in the back of the truck, pickup
Oh,
truck, I think, right? And then parked out in front, and Brian was like under the truck working on it. Like, and so these guys came, like, they stole everything off the truck while he was under the truck working on it. Like,
oh no. Did you all ever get it back?
well, that's like a funny story because we went in and I was talking to Michael. I said, Michael, I'm going to call the police. And Michael said, the police aren't going to do anything. It's not going to do any good. And I said, oh, I'm just going to call him anyway. So, so I called him, and then these cops show up, and they say, oh, we think we might know where it is. So they like go less than a block away, I think, someone's garage, and this old African American lady answers the door, and she says her grandson or might have put something in the garage. So then she opens the garage for them, and it's like all this stuff, not only our stuff, but all this other stuff's in there. And we got everything back the same night.
Wow, wow, okay. And that whole time period of the early Sleepers lineup, it was so quick because your first show up, at least up in San Francisco, was Christmas Eve '77, and then that
Oh,
version of the band,
Christmas Day,
Christmas
or
Day,
Christmas night.
Christmas night. Okay. And then the last show that I could ever find by that lineup, I'm not sure if this was the last one, was August of '78. So it was just 8 months.
Yeah, but then that same lineup, we got back
Got
together
back
for a
together.
while.
Right.
Uh, but well, a lot happened because Michael Kowalski OD'd in that spring,
Right.
early summer. Michael had to flee the country because of the the
Yeah.
bikers. The bikers were going to kill him, basically. So he went
Ex-
back to Canada for a while, and
There was a rumor in one of the scene reports in Slash. I was able to go back through the archives and of that, and it said, rumor has it the Sleepers have called it quits because of Ricky hitting his bandmates with the mic stand too many times. But um, that was
that's
just part of the
nonsense.
story.
That's that's
Yeah.
not true. I wish that was the worst of it. But
Right.
well, Ricky used to hit himself in the head with the mic more often than anyone else.
She says she fell down by the driveway. She want everything on my way. He cried, oh, help upon. Said he was told that he was wrong. She was a time.
Well, that's what they have to, like, all this like tragedy and intrigue, and then they have to listen to the music because the music. I mean, I'm not the right person to say it, but people just tell me that it was so groundbreaking. This is what other people are telling me, and so different, from what everything else that was going on, and that we were basically creating genres that would later become, in vogue. That's what. See, I don't like to look at it that way because it's just me and my music, or me and our music. But this is what people are telling me.
And
Um,
even peers, I think, at the time would say that from what I would find in interviews that were done at the time or things. And I heard somebody describe it as a band's band. Uh, but I don't think it's a band's band in the sense of like musician music. It's just more, maybe there was more appreciation for, the different, you would bring in new songs, like you said, or changing up the set list. So it wouldn't necessarily be the easiest thing for a casual uh, a casual showgoer to latch onto at first. But
Well, we were forced to, not forced, but we to improvise a lot more than other bands because of Ricky's spontaneous style in his, his phrasing and his lyrics. In the very beginning, we would sit down with him and try to nail the lyrics, right?
yeah,
Which we did in the very beginning. But then it sort of after that, it was just sort of like spontaneous. Then we just write it down after he like after it had come out of him. So that's like the very early songs. You would have Michael and I actually writing some of the lyrics with Ricky, filling in the gaps. But I'm talking at the very very early songs like the Dogs, for instance. So like the Dogs, which you can hear on the Miners Benefit full tape,
right.
that definitely has lyrics from me and Michael and Ricky collaborating. And if you can, it's basically sort of a science fiction apocalypse kind of a theme, like almost like the Matrix, before there was a Matrix. But that was kind of interesting. And then we just started writing down what we think Ricky was saying, and then we just get it down on paper, after that. And then even later, we would just let him do whatever he wanted. We never even bothered to write it down. Like,
Right, right. But my understanding of Sea of Unrest, I mean, it couldn't have been true of all of it, but the Toiling Midgets records, at least a good portion of it was stuff that he came up with and on the spot in the studio, and then learned later.
and then we sort of like did that ourselves. For instance, the song Linda, that song sort of came out of thin air spontaneously during rehearsal down in San Jose. It's like the whole thing, all the parts, everything, it just like crystallized, beginning with Michael tuning his guitar. That's where you
Okay,
get that da 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 da,
okay,
that little guitar note. And then Tim and I start doing this bass and drum thing, and then Ricky's spontaneously doing the lyrics, and then all the changes just happened. I don't know. It's just one of those, miraculous conceptions. Like,
right. That definitely makes sense when you think about it. And you all were, I tried to figure it out on the guitar, and I decided you all must have been in some kind of alternate tuning, because those notes that Michael was playing is not, you don't get those.
well, we were either like at various times one step drop, in other words, lower than
Yeah,
normal,
yeah,
or even 1.5 steps,
that makes a lot of sense.
which is it's something that like people like Black Sabbath had done. We weren't the
Exactly.
first ones to do that, but plus Ricky was a baritone, so it kind of fit in.
Right, right. Yeah, it was, but it was still pretty. If I kind of do my mental Rolodex of the punk era bands, there weren't a lot that were tuning down um, at that point. So it definitely adds a little extra, dare I say, grunginess.
Right, right.
But
Well, we didn't know what grunge. I mean, grunge came later, but you could say that it does sound a little bit like grunge.
although I do kind of hate the idea that it has to be like, oh, this gave rise to grunge, therefore it's worth listening to. I would say the same. Like, even if that had never happened, it would still be what it is. And
It's just a unique combination of the people. Like, I was going through this with Adrian, and I was like telling her all the albums that we were listening to, and all the albums that I found at Michael's parents' house when I met Michael. And you had interesting things like Styx, UFO,
sticks.
Pink Floyd. I remember he had Pink Floyd Metal. He really loved that album.
What about
Uh,
Camel?
he
He
had
told me about
Camel.
Camel.
Yep. Did he tell you about that?
He told me about Camel. He told me about listening to a show on one of the radio stations down there called Acid Rock something, or some kind of acid rock radio show as well. And he somehow, I know Camel is not really acid rock, but he associated those kinds of that period in his life, because he was, he talked about going to see Robin Trower, or going to see, going up
Right.
to Winterland. And that's another thing that, a lot of like when I was younger and I would read these punk histories, it made it seem like there was this really sharp divide between punk and what came before it. But so many people,
Not
so
with
to
us, though.
yeah, and I heard that from a lot, like especially with the glam thing, or Craig told me about being really into Alice Cooper, and certainly Mick Ronson, but there was also a lot. Michael was pretty unabashed about Joe Walsh or James Gang and stuff that would be you know considered dinosaur
Exactly.
music,
Yeah.
but
And I had been in that, David Bowie, glam rock, Roxy music phase where was doing a lot of that stuff, and Ricky was listening to a lot of Pink Floyd, Beatles, um, you know.
one that
Big-
I've heard from, one that I got from Michael, that he told me Michael Kowalski used to like a lot, was the John Cale solo records and the song "Fear is a Man's Best Friend."
Oh yeah, Kowalski was a big John Cale fan. What's a really good song is "Mr. Wilson" by John Cale, which I think that song is about. It's a homage to Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys. Yeah.
You put together the EP, the self-titled
Yeah, I did the
EP.
EP. I did all the artwork. I did the mastering. Then Richard Peterson. I got the photo from Richard Peterson when he was still in San Francisco, and I did a lot of the mechanicals right at Richard Peterson's studio, just working on his table there. Uh, This is all before computers.
When you put out the Sleepers thing, did you have the idea that you were starting a label, or was it really to put out that record?
I created a label. So I guess I was thinking I'm going to create a label at the same time. So, Win was the name,
Right.
Win Records, which is the opposite of like a punk name.
Right,
Like
right.
it was like a positive. I was in this rebellious thing where I was going like opposite everything negative that the punks were doing, or some of the other punks were doing. Maybe that was my inner values coming out. But yeah, I did that while Michael had fled the country, so he was not even here.
Right. And the dates on the back of the record, I believe it was like March and June, or January and March of 78 that you all recorded. I can't remember.
Well,
It's
we went
other
to
side of it.
the first studio in Marin or Mill Valley, I think, called Trace Virgos.
Right.
That's was supposed to be just a demo, but we did Seventh World, No Time, Linda there, and then that version of Seventh World is not the one that we used on the EP, but
Right.
was done. And then so they wouldn't let us have the master because it was like too expensive and we didn't have the money. So they just they gave us the final mix down, but not the 8-track master. That was 8-track. So they kept that. Who knows what happened to that? But and then later, I forget, what does it say? Few months after that, we went with Urex Reed,
Right. Right.
who worked at the Mabuhay, and we did a 16-track of She's Fun and Seventh World and Flying, and
Okay.
Tewksbury Studio.
Would you all rent this for us like 4 hours or 8 hours, or?
I don't know. It was so insane. it's like everything was moving at the speed of light at that time. I don't even know what we were doing. We just went out, we need to record these songs, and we just like however long it took. And it didn't take that long. So
You had a lot more songs that could have been recorded, right?
oh yeah, yeah.
Was that a matter of that lineup breaking up before you could get back in the studio, or
Yeah.
was it?
I mean, we had far more songs than we knew. We were like throwing songs away and writing new ones, changing the set all the time. Like when we got back together the second time, same line out, then we wrote like a whole nother set of songs that could have been another album.
And were you all playing? You were playing some songs that like Theory before, like in '79 before the later lineup picked those up, or
Let's see, the first Theory. Okay, let me get this right. The third time we got together there was the Roz period, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so then after the Roz period and Ricky came back, because the Roz period wasn't working because it was just too different. He was just too different of a singer
Yeah, and
for the Sleepers
this
to,
was
to
this was
really work.
this is what I call the musical chairs period, because Roz, well, he was a couple of singers removed. They had Negative Trend had a couple of other singers since then, but he still had been in Negative Trend like a year prior. And then Ricky at that point was singing with the band that would become known as Flipper,
Right,
and Bruce was up in Portland, where Roz had been on sort of a sabbatical after a Negative Trend. So all these kind of different combinations were happening, and that was throughout kind of mid '79, like April
right.
to about November. Yeah, and by the time Ricky was back, that was. I guess we were talking about this a couple of weeks ago. That show that you all were going to play at the Temple Beautiful, is that right? The
Yeah,
one that got shut down. That's where
right.
you all.
Yeah, because I forget who opened for us, but they played, but then it shut down before we could go on. Although we did the sound check.
And that opening tape, is that the same as the tape you told me that you've recently found that of you and Michael, or was that something else?
It's the same tape.
It's the same tape. Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I was just talking to Adrian, who's Michael's partner before he passed away. So that is like I think that's the only song that Michael and I solely wrote and did all the instruments just between us and no one else in the band, just Michael and I. So that's kind of interesting. But what was just really upsetting and depressing was that it was probably the most sober everyone was, and the most creative we all were at that, at a peak, and then just well rehearsed. All we were just ready for that show, and Michael and I learned Link Ray's Rumble, so we were going to do that intro, and then we are going to go into Rumble, and then we were going to go into like the whole all new set, which is a lot of new stuff. And then we did the sound check. I remember that, but I think it was another Feinstein thing, where she just like continually harassed the music scene.
And then that version of the band didn't last that much longer, because it wasn't long after that Michael went back to New York.
Yeah, that didn't. But I remember you were asking when Theory was written. I think
Oh, right. Yeah.
slightly after that.
Okay.
Again, when we got back, but I think Tim left. So Jeff Raphael was on drums. Or Tim might have been in there when we wrote Theory, but then he left, and then Jeff Raphael came in.
Okay.
But anyway, so Michael and I, it was another thing where we wrote the song either in rehearsal or just practicing. I know Michael and I we collaborated really well together. It's just that we were always fighting about something else, But like,
Yeah.
so that if you know what a bridge in a song, there's a bridge, right? So
Oh yeah, yeah.
so this is like one of those things, like not comparing myself to the Beatles, but Michael wrote the first part, and then I wrote the bridge, and then Ricky wrote the words, and then Tim did his thing. But I think what happened, Tim left again. I'm trying to remember the sequence. Jeff Raphael came back, and then I got upset again, and I left. But I had written another song, pretty much just me and Ricky, which was called "The Mind," about the same time. And then Michael wrote the outro coda, which sounds like a Peter Gunn kind of a theme at the very end of that song. But I wrote the main song,
Oh, okay.
and
Yeah,
that's
I can.
so both these appear on Painless Nights. And then Theory also has a single version, but there's no drummer on the single version.
Right. And so when the McLeod brothers came in, did that catch you off guard? The 19 for listeners, the 1980 lineup, the Painless Nights lineup. Were you wanting to be included, or were you just
No, I,
off?
I I just flat out quit because there was issues, not musically related,
Right.
but other issues in the band, and Tim quit before I did. And anyway, the whole Sleeper story. There's a
Oh
lot of
yeah, definitely. Yeah. So this is
really,
yeah.
really horrible drug and use and criminal activity, like criminals getting involved with us, and you know, just really bad stuff.
Right. And so that was when obviously you were working I think you're working at the Stanford Research Institute at that point with your graphic
Yeah, but
design job.
I had a child. I had a baby too
Oh, okay.
at that time. So I think I don't know if I was consciously getting a little bit more responsible.
Right. And you always were I mean, every band has a responsible one. I mean, the most responsible one, and you definitely had that from what everyone has told me. And
the
but
least
that
the least
the least
irresponsible.
irresponsible, yeah. And you did put out several more records around that time. The Quiet Room.
Yeah, 1980, 81 was the start, which was uh, they came out of the Roommates, which is a Palo Alto band. But then the start was almost the same personnel, a little bit different. So they did a single. It's kind of a mod thing with some psychedelic overtones. And I got to do the arrangements, and I did lead guitar on one of the songs, like a Ebo lead guitar break, and on that one. And then right after that one, I did the Quiet Room, which is more of a techno, I guess you'd call it, and that was kind of widely played in clubs because of the techno aspect of it.
Right. I'm trying something Peters.
Philip Peters,
Philip
he's still
Peters. Okay.
around. He lives in
Okay.
Pasadena. He has
Okay.
a band called Intravenous Venus. If I'm
Uh,
pronouncing that right, it's just he and this woman. It's like a duo. It's kind of goth techno.
okay. And then let's see. Then Half Church and then the Quiet Room one. Is the Quiet Room one the most sought after release after the Sleepers, or
I think the start was for a while very sought after, and then Quiet Room started getting to be sought after. So I'm not sure which one.
okay.
Uh, and Half Church, I just bankrolled it and executive produced it. I didn't do any technical production on it, and I did the artwork. A friend of mine did the artwork, or both of us together did the artwork.
Okay, and I'm cheating a little bit here looking at the Discogs page, but it looks like the label went kind of on hold until the Alex Benitez and John Murray records. Is that?
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. Yeah.
And so this is definitely something that is not in the era of the book, but the John Murray. Tell us about him, that because there was some involvement with Tim Mooney as well on that. Is that right?
Yeah,
Or-
Tim Mooney did most of the hardcore engineering and production
Oh, okay.
on the Graceless Age, which is probably the best John Murray piece of work, the one that had all the critical acclaim, and especially in Europe and the UK. And they wanted, anyway, Tim suggested to John Murray that I do the vinyl, because they had a homemade CD on their own label, and then they had that duplicated on another label, but it was all CD. But they wanted to do a really nice vinyl version, so we did a 180 gram vinyl production of it, which turned out really nice and limited release. I think we did only 250 or 500 copies.
Oh, okay. That was not long before Tim Mooney died, right?
Right. And then at the same time, Tim was on my song that I released. He played the drums. It's called A Love Story, parentheses, Stuff is Worth Repairing, in parentheses, which is a phrase that Tim used.
How much were you obviously working with him on those, but was that the first time you'd been in touch with him for a while, or had you stayed in touch with him over the years?
I did much of the Alex Benitez work I did with Tim, and also with Bart Thurber, who's from Palo Alto. Bart Thurber has House of Faith studio in Oakland. So the first Alex Benitez CD, half was done with Tim Mooney's studio, and half was done with Bart Thurber's studio. And then that's where I met the guys in the Green Door. They were doing a recording, like a demo, at Tim's studio. Green Door is a new band, psychedelic cowboy western kind of rock. Do you know who they are?
No, I don't. I'm like Rip Van Winkle when it comes to new music, but because Tim Mooney, obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, but he went on from the Sleepers to play in the Toiling Midgets, and then kind of bounced around a little bit in the '80s, and then Toiling Midgets got back together, but he was also playing with American Music Club, and he eventually went into that. But were you in touch with him during, say, like the American Music Club years, or did you notice that he changed a lot in terms of his interest, or was it more just a matter of mellowing out with age, or?
Maybe a little bit of mellowing out, but also the music that those guys were doing was more subdued.
Right, right.
Like kind of like the Red House Painters, or that kind of stuff. So yeah, a lot of it is just the music, what was appropriate.
Did Tim seem like the same Tim that you knew from back in the old days, or?
I think so. I mean, I
Okay.
met his wife, who's a photographer. I had dinner with Tim and his daughter during when I was recording this stuff. So Tim and I got to be, pretty friendly again just before he passed away.
Can we look forward to? I don't know what you can tease on this, or what developments there have been, but any reissue.
Well, we're trying to do everything on the up and up now that I'm working with, not working per se, but coordinating with Adrian.
Right.
I mean, they were about to get married, so it's like, they were definitely partners. All I can say is we're hoping as soon as possible that something will happen.
Thank you to Paul Draper for doing this interview and for patiently waiting for me to get it out there. And what you're hearing in the background is his song, A Love Story, Stuff Is Worth Repairing, with John Murray on vocals, Tim Mooney on drums, and Alex Benitez on guitar.
I fell asleep in my 10-color lines. We drop one beat too many. Walking through the news, the drop to break your back. Wading through newsprint covered fronts, and I'm setting fire to all that.